Hit go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Friday's episode of the XP Live Expose with me, Ben Richards, and Jack Jiggins. We've got a fun-packed week and agenda today, starting with a bit of a letdown with one of our refinances, and we are going to be talking all about that and some things that you can do as plan Bs, plan Cs, and things that you can put in place for contingencies. I'm going to be talking about some SAP and EPC learnings that we've gone through this week. Every developer should understand what's happening in this space and what they need to do in the next couple of years, because it is massive, it is dramatic, and it will add lots of cost to your project. So you need to fully understand how you can sort of reduce and minimize those costs. Why you should always draw up a heads of terms document, whether you're speaking with tenants, investors, solicitors, securing the right term debt for your scheme. Some insights into the conversations we've been having in our biggest scheme to date regarding utilities. That's electrical, gas, water, and data. Company organizational charts and splitting responsibilities within your business, and that will become more and more prevalent and important the larger your company gets. So hopefully you guys can learn from some of the things that we've gone through, the conversations that we've had with our non-exec director, and the help that they've given us to kind of prepare ourselves for growth and to build the business that we want to build. Jack's going to be talking through some of his hacks in terms of posting documents, and then we've actually had a few Q&A questions from our wider network, and thank you very much, Jimmy Kebe, for some of your comments, which I can see are already lined up ready to go, which is amazing. So we do try to push a preview of what we are going to be talking about on the Friday Live on YouTube before we actually start, and you can actually start commenting on that before we start. So if you've got any questions, whether we're live or not, you can drop them in the comments below and we will try and address them. So welcome everybody.
And for podcast listeners, it's the 24th of November we're recording this.
Nice. So yeah, we've been let down this week. We have since July been working very, very heavily with Yorkshire Building Society to refinance one of our assets. It was the property deal of the year. It's from an equity perspective and a value perspective, we've driven a lot of value into the scheme to the tune of £1.2 million. And we've given pretty much our inside leg measurements with the wider portfolio of properties in terms of A&Ls. We've jumped through hoops from an EPC perspective, providing them with relevant reports to show how in the future we can get it up to a C if ever those regulations came back in. And this week, after 5 months of deliberation and jumping through hoops, they've said they're no longer willing to lend on our asset. So just incredibly frustrating, really. I'm sure you guys have felt the same thing and been let down by a number of lenders. And I guess it is one of those things where if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And we've had to now move to our plan Bs and plan Cs to try and speed up the refinance, get that money back out and move on to the next project. So yeah, one thing I would say is to make sure you've got some secondary lenders waiting in the wings, and also that you factor in huge amounts of contingency in terms of timelines for any refinance, because this thing has already been going on for 5 months. And now we're to a certain degree back to square one.
Yeah, I would say that just for any other developers or investors out there, like sometimes you do get into a situation where you waste a lot of time on a process with a lender. And annoyingly, in this instance, they've actually pulled out for reasons that they knew at the very beginning. And these things do happen. And there's sometimes not a lot that you can control about their processes and what they're doing. One thing that we always get asked when we're speaking to new lenders or banks is, what are we looking for? And time again, we're a small outfit. We don't have a financial director monitoring these things. I always say that we're equally process driven as we are rate driven. And what that means is these 5 months that we wasted, it might have been cheaper to go with a more expensive lender. So to analyze that when you're going into lending. when it's development and bridging, we pretty much always pick process over rate, because I do believe it's a fairly sliding scale. The better the rate, the worse the process. And that's because a lot of people floods that area of the market want to be with that lender. But this is actually a refinance. So we're looking for a 25-year mortgage, 5-year fixed, and it's very difficult to go with the process when it is such a drastic difference of cost. We were with YBS, we're talking about 5.25%. That's it, not above base. That's the all-in rate for a 5-year fixed block product because it's 14 flats. And that is attractive in the current market. Now we're probably looking at 6%, and that difference in 0.75 to 75 bits in cost will be almost 15 grand a year. So it's difficult to ignore those cheaper rates. I suppose one thing we could say that is a really, I suppose, saving grace when you do get that down is Ben mentioned not only having other options available. We've got now 2 other lenders that are, in my opinion, not far off the same pace as YBS were and messing us around to get to this point. But one thing that's really key is make sure that when you have a valuation done in the first place, that they are acceptable, so that they're a more robust surveying practice that are likely to be on other panels, because then you can commonly get a rewrite of that valuation. So you're not wasting 2 weeks to get someone on site, another, in this case, 6.5 grand, and then another 2 weeks for them to draw the report up. We're fortunate that we can sort of push our valuation over to the new lenders, so that they can review that internally and have a rewrite. And as a result, we have saved another month. And in reality, it probably hasn't wasted too much time in terms of where we were at with YBS if they went ahead, and where we would be at with other lenders. So that's one way that we try and sort of prevent future happenings like this. But at the end of the day, it does happen, especially when you're looking at a 5-year fixed mortgage and you really like their rates and you've been messed around. Coincidentally, Ben, I don't know if you've noticed, but when we bought this site, we got rates, and we always do this, from a lender to refinance it at the back end. So we're in very different times now, and this was probably sort of 2 years ago. And the leading lender was Paragon at something like 3.25%. So where we're at with YBS is we're now at 5.25%, but that is as a result of base rate and the market changing. That's not necessarily because the schemes changed or because Paragon aren't that competitive. And now, guess what? We're actually running a process with Paragon, who we were initially discussing this deal with 2 years ago, because they are equally as competitive now as the rest of the market and can get this done pretty quickly. So that's what we're pushing forward with. But I suppose just to shout out to everyone, if this does happen, you sometimes waste time. It happens to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to suck it up sometimes. I just wanted to say, before we go on to the next point, Jimmy, thank you very much for the comment. You asked, do you mind sharing your advice on stamp duty? Last week, you said you'll try to tackle this matter this week, so I'm hoping you'll be able to talk about it today. That was on episode 43. We didn't see this message, and to be honest, we forgot, so we will try and pick that up next week for you. But I did notice that you commented last week also, and you can't really see that very well, but I'll sort of give you the gist of it. We talked about some assisted sales that we've done historically, and you talked about there being a section 44A of the Finance Act says that you cannot have an interest in a property, otherwise you will be liable to for stamp duty. With an assisted sale, typically what happens is that you are effectively the consultant. We are developers, but we are a consultant. And what we were saying is that typically when you run an assisted sale, there's no transaction, so there's no stamp duty to pay. And that additional cost is kind of, shared between the homeowner and you as the consultant for sort of providing that service. Now, the key thing here is having an interest in the property. And as a consultant providing developer services to help deliver the scheme on a project management perspective and, get paid some form of profit share at the tail end, does not quantify you having an interest in the property. You're not on the property deeds. You're not on any of the debt or mortgage provisions. You've got no tie to the property. And that's really why, that you're not liable to pay stamp duty based on based on running an assisted cell. Maybe we'll try and go through that in a bit more detail at another point, but I just wanted to sort of, one, say thank you for the comment and address it as much as I can sort of quickly now, and we'll try and address it maybe in full another time. Cool. Number 2 is all about the SAP learnings that we've learned this week, or I've learned speaking to some SAP consultants. We've been running a lot of analysis on Tame, our new project, which will be 17,000 square feet of office that we're converting to residential. And we've also been running this same process for Colney Hatch Lane, which is a 9-unit scheme conversion in Muswell Hill. Now, through this process, the latest SAP updates changed last year. They were meant to make kind of electric heating a little bit better in terms of how it's perceived by the SAP software, but it's still so far away from where it needs to be. We've been installing electric combi boilers in a lot of our schemes to date, and with the new SAP updates, there's absolutely no way that we're going to be able to kind of use those going forward unless we are introducing a shed load of PV. We've insulated the property as much as we can and added other kind of energy saving measures into the scheme, because even with upgrading external walls, a kilowatt of PV, for example, we were still at around a low D EPC rating with an electric boiler, and I was finding it very, very difficult to find ways in which sneaking it, getting it to sneak up above a C. And this is all to do with the government's push towards the future home standards. The future home standards will be coming in 2025 and is a massive step up from building regulations today. Building regulations were increased at the end of 2021, I believe. That was onerous in itself. 2025 future home standards is, I think, a 31% increase on today's standards. So unless you as a developer are starting to get to grips with how making your properties more airtight can help, how insulating them more, how utilizing renewable technology affects your SAPs and your EPCs, you're going to have a real shock when you get to delivery stage if you haven't thought about these things from a very, very early stage within your design, or your architect hasn't started to introduce these things. We walked around a nearby office conversion in Tame on Wednesday, and the agent said, much to his dismay, he was trying to push the architect to think more sustainably and get the units above a C, because they're actually trying to rent it out. They are very lucky that the government has made a U-turn on the fact that EPC should be a C rating from 2025, because most of his units are a D or an E. So he's just fully fitted out a brand new fit out, looked sparkly new, spent a lot of money on that refurbishment, to find that if the government didn't make a U-turn in 2 years, they wouldn't be able to let those units out without upgrading to an EPC-C, which would have been very, very difficult given the fit out that they'd already done. So I think word of warning for developers: understand how your architects are approaching this. Work with your energy assessors to really understand what can be done from an early stage to improve your energy rating. The one thing I would say is that gas boilers are still number one, really, in terms of how effective they are in EPCs. Changing from the electric combi boilers to a gas combi boiler jumped our EPC rating from a high E, low D to an easy B, just by making that one change and nothing else. So gas is still there. We've been reluctant to install new gas connections because of the cost. So we've been trying to counteract that by installing electric boilers. But on Tame, we're going to be getting a cost to install the new gas connections, and weighing up the cost benefit to the things that we would have to do to increase the insulation, to improve our SAP ratings, improve our EPCs, if using just electric boilers, and the capacity on the system. These electric boilers are quite intensive, and there may not be capacity within the network, which means increased costs for extra substations and all that sort of stuff. So the cost of installing new gas connections may be far less than actually installing a new substation on site. So it is a massive thing that developers need to get to grips with. So hopefully that's a bit of a word of warning for you developers out there.
Got a bit of a fun insight when it comes to gas heating for anyone that cares. I was just in America and staying around the in-laws in Palm Springs, where it's extremely hot. And I found out, I didn't actually realize before, I thought they had some sort of MVHR, like air heating system. And it's literally winter there for like 3 days, and then it's summer for the rest of the year. But they said that their gas bill average per month to heat their house and do hot water is $14. So for everyone over in England paying a small fortune every month, I thought that would be a fun insight to what the life is like on the other side of the pond.
Wowza. Cheap as chips. Good. So why should you draw up a heads of terms document? And I wanted to share really live on screen some of the things that we do here. So what do I mean by heads of terms document? So when we agree commercial terms with a joint venture partner or an investor, often you'll have key commercial elements like the rate of return, the percentage profit share, the security they might, you might be giving them, all these key commercial terms that you've pre-agreed. Now, if we went to a solicitor and said we want a shareholders agreement drawn up for a joint venture partnership with this person, they're going to go away and draw up a big fluffy document that probably doesn't give you everything that you need based on what's previously been discussed. Now, a lawyer is going to write in legalese. They're not going to know the commercial terms that have been agreed between you and an investor. So you need to help them out, because if you don't, they're just going to continue racking up more hourly charges to make loads of changes as you go back and forth between solicitors, between JV partner, between yourself, to get to a shareholders agreement and a JV agreement that you're happy with. So what we always do is draw up a heads of terms document. This outlines all of the commercial terms that have been agreed between you and the investor, outlines all of these, the security, the arrangement, the fees, who pays solicitors' fees, what your solicitor contact details are. It's a document that is drawn up, is agreed between parties before any solicitors actually see it. So you know that the key commercial elements of your agreement are all written in a 1 or 2 page document signed by both parties that then get sent to your solicitors to then use as the basis of their shareholders agreement. Now, this doesn't just work for investor partnerships. This also works for things like commercial leases like this one on the screen. So we've just, well, I say just, we hope to sign up the 6th of our 7th, the 6th out of 7 units in one of our office units in Reading as a office tenant. And we sent them this document to review. So instead of going back and forth over email with all of, oh, actually, I forgot to ask you this, or I forgot to ask you this. We've been through this loads of times already. We know what office tenants are going to ask. So why not put it down on one piece of paper where we're talking about what term they have, if there are any break clauses, what the rental is, what the service charges consist of, how the utilities are structured, what deposit payments are there, what reviews are there within the lease, like all of these things are the key things that the tenant is going to need to know. So what we will do is get these down on a heads of terms document like this one. We will send that over to the other side. If they have any queries then at that point, we can address them and then sign them, send them off to a solicitor to actually draw up the formal lease for that office. And it just saves a hell of a lot of time and a hell of a lot of cost in solicitors writing up wrong reports. If you want some insight into those templates, as always, kind of comment below templates or click what have we got? I think it's bit.ly/xp_templates, and you can register your interest to actually get those templates from us.
Yeah, so we have templates set up for heads of terms for investor joint venture partnerships. We have them set up for commercial tenants wanting to rent space from us, and we have these set up for also assisted sales. So if you want any specific topic or all of them, as Ben mentioned, reach out. And I think just to sort of summarize what Ben's pointed on there, your solicitor is there to legalize everything, not to negotiate. All the negotiation should take place before you go into legals. Otherwise, your solicitor that should spend half a day pulling a lease together, or pulling a shareholders agreement together, or a loan agreement together, or even, you know, an assisted sale document together. Rather than spending half a day, they're waiting a week for the other solicitor to reply, and then it gets complicated, and they've only negotiated the first page because that was the first thing that drew their attention to it. So make sure you do all the negotiation. And one thing that's really clear is it makes your partner or tenant or whoever it may be extremely clear on the parameters of the deal. What we've actually noticed from this is sometimes when you're commercially negotiating with a tenant that might be a new business owner, might have not done anything like this before, they kind of get put off when something crops up late in the day about it being a full repairing lease, or having details that they weren't aware of, and you don't want to wear them thin on that part. You want to be as transparent as you can, and especially with commercial leases, they always say to us, how negotiable is the rent? I say, well, you sign a 100-year lease, it's very negotiable. So you kind of want to get the bigger picture and see what they're going to push back on so that you can adapt your negotiations as well. It's all well and good agreeing a rent, but if there's loads of break periods, and if it's a short lease, and if they haven't really got much of a balance sheet, it's a pretty risky tenant. So negotiations is really important to have the full picture and understand what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, so that you can put the best foot forward to make sure that you can get the deal closed.
Nice. Cool. Where are we?
So next one is finance, and specifically buy-to-let finance, exit finance, HMO finance, or whatever that may be. It's sort of touching on the first slide, which is how YBS let us down on our block refinance product, and it's more sort of just alluding to, if there's anyone out there that's currently looking for refinancing out anything, that it could even be your personal home. If you are refinancing out anything within your portfolio, what you really need to be cautious of is the exact parameters of what lenders are pushing towards you. If you have a really good broker, I'm sure that they would do this for you and protect your interest. But to run through them, when you are refinancing an asset at the moment, because back in 2000 and back during the credit crunch, so we're talking sort of 2008 to 2010, the government put certain stipulations on banks leveraging so high, and they put parameters so that there's a rental stress cover, which means how much does the property rent for? This is obviously especially buy-to-lets. And then if it rents for X amount, what is the coverage for the mortgage? The reason that they brought out these parameters is to stop people going into negative equity or getting into positions where they can't actually sustain the mortgage costs. So it's all well and good, and we appreciate that, but the banks have been smart, and the way that they've been smart is they keep their rate lower, and they increase their arrangement fee for the mortgage significantly higher. So we've actually seen arrangement fees, and we've discussed this before, at 7% on some mortgages. So what I would advise you do, if you are coming to exit if you're coming to exit and on a refinance, is we look at a multitude of things. We look at the arrangement fee, we look at the rate, we then look at the annualized rate, and then the annualized cost. And what we do with the arrangement fee is we divide it by how many years that you're getting that new product. So if you've got a 3-year product or a 5-year product, a 4% fee might not actually be that bad if you're running on a 4-year product or a 5-year product. So what we do is we compare those elements of that mortgage. So for an example, if you're getting a 5-year, we've got it up now in front of us. So this is actually live terms for what we secured to replace YBS. So you can see Secure Trust, Paragon, Kent Reliant. Now, Secure Trust have a low arrangement fee of 2%, but their rate is higher at 6.79%. So because we're locking this in for 5 years, we're going to be conscious of the annualized cost. Now, what that means is at the end of the 5 years, how much cost have we paid out over the 5 years? Great, you can be attracted to the rate, but if the arrangement is higher, how do you actually sort of quantify that? So it's a really straightforward scenario. You just put the arrangement, the rate, and then the annualized costs. And you can see here that Kent Reliant has marginally come in at the cheapest. But on the face of the terms, it is still the cheapest. But we've seen where, for an example, let's assume Kent Reliant's arrangement fee is 7%. it would not be the cheapest, and you'd go with one of the other options. Really simple process, and definitely worth looking at, to look at. So we've mentioned the rental stress cover, the cost over term. Another thing to be really conscious of is the early redemption charges. I have never seen a market where the early redemption charges are where they are at the moment. I think our early redemption charges on the Paragon product are 5% in year 1 and 2, 4% in year 3, 3% in year 4, and 2% in year 5. Now, I don't believe that in 5 years' time we're going to be much different from the rates that you can see in front of you, but in a year or two's time, I think they could be quite different. So one thing to consider is, would you consider a potential exit on that asset in a year or two? Make sure you know what the ERCs are. So another process you can do is actually look at exit year 1, exit year 2, exit year 3, and total up the cost to run it to that point across the various lenders, because they will all have different ERCs, so early redemption charges. One thing I also recommend is early redemption charges are quite negotiable. The arrangement definitely isn't that negotiable. The rate is at 100%. They've probably been through months and months of board of approval, credit approval, their funding line approval to get to that rate. There's a very, very small chance that you'll get that negotiated down. We actually got Secure Trust down from 6.99 to 6.79, but they couldn't do anything about the arrangement. But when it comes to ERCs, early redemption charges, make sure you do push back, because all they're going to say is no, and you still haven't lost anything. But it gives you the flexibility if you do want to refinance, or if you do want to sell the asset, you're not paying 5% at the rear end in 18 months' time once you've already paid 5% at the beginning end and 5% per year. So it's something to be cautious of.
Nice. Good. Sorry about those technical hiccups. So yeah, just one thing I wanted to touch on is splitting services. Now, a lot of people are listening to this, investors, developers, whether they're doing commercial conversions or splitting houses into 3 flats, or anywhere where you're converting, a single unit into numerous units, will at some point need to split electrical services coming into these units. And I just wanted to share our learnings this week with our project in Tame. The image that you see is effectively 4 compartments of the building that we're converting. We're going to be converting each floor into 3 units. So what you see in front of you is 4 sections of the building. There'll be a flat on the ground floor, flat on the first floor, flat on the second floor in each part of those 4 sections. So 12 flats in total. Now, each section has a 3-phase incoming electrical supply. Now, when you're looking at these things and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm turning this into 12 units, I'm going to need 12 new electrical services coming into the site. If you had to dig up those 12 new services from the main road all the way into each unit, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of pounds to do that work. So we met our utilities consultant on site on Wednesday. Each section of the building is currently arranged for an office. Now, the offices have 3-phase supply to each part of the building, which you can see on the image on the left. So I've sort of labeled, you can't really see it that well, to be fair, but where my cursor is, these are 3 fuses on this 3-phase incoming supply. So 1, 2, 3, each fuse is about 100 amps. Now, what can be done with these 3-phase supplies, we were hoping that we would be able to convert or connect 3 new meters into that 3-phase supply to cater for our ground floor, first floor, and second floor apartment. And luckily, that is possible. Now, the added benefit, having spoken to our utilities consultant, because we were wondering about our landlord supply, i.e., if I'm thinking this 3-phase supply can serve 3 flats, shit, what am I going to do about the landlord supply? What he said was there'll be no issue with actually including that landlord supply as a 4th supply coming off the 3-phase incoming, i.e. there will be sufficient capacity on that cable to do so. So that was really great news. We were thinking we'd have to maybe bring in 1 new connection to cater for all of the landlord supplies, but actually what's going to happen is that each section of the building will just have 4 new meters, 1 landlord, 1 ground floor, 1 first floor, 1 second floor flat. And this is going to save us an absolute fortune. We don't have to contact the local electrical supplier, i.e. SSE or UKPN, for new additional services. We don't have to dig up anything externally, which is massive in terms of civils works and costs. And all we really need to do after the 3-phase meter is connect our new individual meters for each individual flat back into that 3-phase. And it's what's called a BNO network. So we will be responsible for everything after that 3-phase supply. So any electrician, qualified electrician, will be able to come in and install those new meters for each flat. So that's a massive win. One thing that we're now looking at is installing solar panels on the roof, and figuring out how to split individual panels down to service individual flats. Because going back to the SAP conversation that I mentioned earlier, to get individual kilowattage from solar panels associated with each individual flat from a SAP perspective, technically it has to be directly linked to that meter for the flat to be used specifically and solely for that flat. Now, I know there are a lot of developers out there who will be saying, well, just connect it to the landlord and then cheat the SAP. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people that do that, but there are ways in which you can split it down. We've been talking to a solar company about using what's called micro inverters. So a micro inverter gets stuck to the back of each particular panel, and then each panel can then be directed via AC current to the meter and used within each flat. So instead of having a PV array that connects to one big inverter, each one can have a little micro inverter, and then you can have the choice of saying, I want 5 panels to go to flat 1, 6 panels to go to flat 2, and only 1 panel to go to flat 3, for example, because I've got a gas boiler in flat 3 and I don't need to overcompensate for the electric boilers that I've got in my flat 1 and 2, for example. So a lot of complications with TAME in this project, but it's fun to learn about all these new things, and we'll keep you updated as and when we learn more.
Company org charts.
Company org charts. Yeah, I mean, we had our meeting with our non-exec director this morning, and he's been very keen for us to create this suite of documents, which I'm going to talk through. And it is a company organizational chart and responsibility matrix. So effectively looking at the bigger picture of your company and planning out each individual department. Even if you don't have the department there is a function in the business that will be needed with that set topic. So what am I talking about? If I can find where I've saved it,
I think it's worth pointing out that even in the early days, when, believe it or not, it was just myself and Ben in the company, we still did this just so that each other knew who was doing what. So you don't need to have a team. I suppose the only time that you wouldn't need to do this if it's just one person, but it might even still be useful to put external consultants in there to support you in those areas. But if you've got you and a partner, or you and one member of the team, it's really important to have that clarity on what everyone's doing.
Yeah, and I think sort of the key thing here, we spoke about it a few weeks ago, I think, in terms of whether you want a sort of lifestyle business where you just want to do a bit of property every now and again and sort of keep it relatively small, or whether or not you actually want to have a bigger business. You want to grow a team, you want to build and continue to build a business around your property developments. And I think when you look at this particular column, which is our property development column, this is where most people start their journey, start their thought process around what they want to do and be as a property developer. All they'll really be thinking about is project specific information. What's the acquisition process of this project? We've got to go through the legals. We've got to find a finance lender. We've got to get through planning. We've then got to go, tender out to contractors, build it, and then sell it. Like, this is where most people come into the development space, because they're only looking at project by project by project. Now, when you've got 8 projects on the go at one time, a team of 10 people, numerous investors to deal with, your business grows far bigger than just siloed projects specifically. And that's when you start to need to think about a group strategy around your business. Who's going to be in your team to support all of the functions of the various team members? Who's going to be looking after your property management if you're holding some of the assets longer term. And that's where this organizational chart can really help kind of put the pieces together. And like Jack says, when we first started 5 years ago, it was me and Jack were the only names in each of these boxes. And these boxes are segments and pieces of each area. So just quickly going through them. So when you're at a group strategy level, you'll have roles and job functions in departments within that part of the business. So under group strategy, you're likely to have a marketing function. You'll be looking at joint ventures, which include investments. You'll be capacity planning. You'll look at your client-based management, positioning within the market, any new products that are coming online, the culture of your business. So these are all group strategy topics. And then to support everything within your business, you're going to have some IT function. You're going to have admin. You're going to have accounting and finance, human resources, legal compliance, office management, and that's all going to be supporting the other functions within the business. The 3 boxes that we've got, so we've got the job function at the top, you've got then the person responsible, and then you've got anyone else involved. So although I don't necessarily get involved, let's say, I don't get involved in the build of our schemes, I am responsible for that build process, and Stuart, our site manager, oversees the projects on site. It may be that in the future we actually have a operations director or a construction director that becomes their responsibility. The build will be their responsibility. So my name gets replaced with the construction director. So as your company evolves, this sort of group organizational chart will evolve, and we just think it's a great way of thinking ahead, structuring the growth of your business, and putting some proper structure to it. And when you're out raising finance, like we're raising for £10 million at the moment for an equity sort of fund into the business, this sort of thought process and proof that we've done this goes down so well with lenders, so well with investors, because they understand that you understand business, and how things need to be grown to a certain size and accounted for to deliver on your business goals.
I think there's a couple of points there I just wanted to pick up on. The difference between responsible and doing is a really key one. You evidently want to make sure that if, for example, I'm in charge of, let's look at legal, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing all of that, but I do sign it off and overview that process. We've actually brought that process into even everything down to our deal analyzers. We've got a tab at the top which says who's responsible for signing it off. Otherwise, everyone dives into it, tweaks some numbers, has a look, but no one actually fully signs off that task or that responsibility. That's one key point, which I think is extremely key. And just back to the point, sort of reverting back sort of 6 years ago when Ben and I were in the inception of XP Property and how we did build an organization chart just with us two, we see all the time where other development companies with partners, and they basically do everything together and they do everything collectively. I think one of the reasons for our successes of scaling the business from 0 million to sort of 40 million a year is purely down to that trust and divide and conquering the roles, so that Ben is doing what Ben does best. I'm doing what I do best. I'm probably pretty rubbish at what Ben does, and I think he'll probably say the same or vice versa. Finding your flow in what you're best at and running with that and trusting that the other partner or other people in the team, if they have everything they do need, is delivering their part of the business. And that's really imperative to focus on if you want to scale a company and build a team that do the work essentially to grow the company with you. And I think, we always reflect on hurdles that we've hit, whether it's, I think we totted up everything that we've delivered to date and it's approaching 100 million in delivery. And a lot of that is actually down to our team and letting our team run with what they're good at and what they need to do and just helping them get to that point.
Yeah, cool. To accompany kind of this overarching org chart, we also have a responsibility and sort of job role section. So I mentioned kind of all of these headline things like marketing, capacity planning, client-based management, positioning, but what does that actually mean? So to accompany that org chart, we also have a job roles and description template and file, which basically sets out what those functions are within the business. What role do they fulfill? So, for accounting and finance, this person or whoever's in this role is responsible for the finances of the business, including adequate financial controls that are maintained and up to date. They're responsible for ensuring that the financial controls are up to date for management information and formal reporting, which will involve but not be limited to coordinating up-to-date bookkeeping, producing management accounts together with the year-end accounting. So this document kind of supplements the org chart and just goes into a bit more detail about what the job roles and what the job functions are within the business. So if you're interested in, if you want that template, if you want to know how we structure our business, what job roles and functions we have, then again, sort of comment below and we can help you out with that.
Cool. On to postage. On to our favourite topic.
Yeah, this is your another Jack's hacks, is it?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel with these Jack's hacks, is it just common sense? But I get really good feedback from them. So here we are. We're talking about Royal Mail and posting. So I'll try and keep it fairly brief, but I hope there's some value in here for anyone that's doing transactions and dealing with legals and dealing with lawyers trying to get deals done. And it's just a few fundamentals that we stick to. We've time and time again had documents sent and no one's received it. We've time and time again had to courier. We actually had one of our investors send his documents in an Uber once because we wanted to get it done that day while everyone was lined up, and that was the final element. But just touching on some fundamentals that we use for postage, and it's really super simple. And I hope, if you think it's super simple and you're doing it, great. There might be people out there that just get one nugget from this, and I hope, that helps their business. So fundamentally, any documents that you have signed and witnessed and it's hard copies needs to be a very, very minimum of signed for. Great, you could post it second class, but what we've had before is where they say a bank or a solicitor has said that they haven't received it, and we actually have the name of the person that signed it within their office, that we can go, well, this person signed for it last Thursday, so I know you have it. And that's really, really imperative. Any documents that are in legals, contracts, TR1 documents, shareholders agreements, even if you've got 4 months until they need to receive it, make sure it's signed for. So the next point is speed of postage. We always just get everything within sort of as soonest availability postage as we can, because for the sake of £6 to £7, it normally saves us headache and time to get ducks in a row and move transactions along. And when we're buying a site, for example, we recently completed on a site where we actually got charged for a late completion. I think the cost was something like £350 per day that we ended up paying for that late completion. So the matter of that day really is negligible. And then the last one is to just don't be afraid to get a courier or even drive the documents yourself to the place they need to be, because sometimes that's a really good use of your time to get that transaction done. So I hope that's useful, a bit of a whistle-stop one, but at the very minimum, if it's an important document, if you're not doing sign for because you're a cheap ass and you can't afford an extra £3, it's inevitable. It's going to hold you up, and it needs to be signed for as a very, very minimum.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think your Jack's hacks are very, very useful, because people it may be common sense, but more often than not, people aren't doing it. So a reminder for things like that is always useful. So we asked a Q&A into our XP community group this morning. Just, is anyone struggling with anything? Can we help with anything? And Dan Brown asked this question. So he's looking at a property that's got PD permission to convert 2 upper floors to 5 times flats, but there's potential to go into the roof space for a 3rd floor. What's the best / quickest way of finding out how feasible / likely it is to get approval for the 3rd floor? It's a difficult one, because a lot of it will come down to, if you're wanting to find that answer out yourself, it's going to come down to experience and your understanding. But to give a bigger picture about who can help you and how you can get a bit of insight, I thought I'd mention a couple of routes that you might want to consider. So first one, if you wanted to go more formal and get some formal understanding from the council, you could go down a pre-app route, so a pre-planning advice application. Now, if you don't already own the property, or you're not in legals, or you haven't exchanged, going down that route is probably futile. One, because it's going to cost you too much, and two, it's also going to take a hell of a long time. So I'd only probably recommend that if you've got that asset, secured, if you're in the process of buying it, and you need some actual sort of formal guidance because you control the property and asset at the moment. Second thing to do would maybe speak to a planning consultant. We work with a number of planning consultants now that will give an internal, an informal review on something. Just give them a quick heads up, the site address, maybe some sales particulars or some photos. They'll quickly come back to us with a bit of insight. If you wanted to pay them a couple £100, they can write a more formal planning what would you call it? Just a planning report, planning statement, just for them to spend, a couple of hours having a look at local guidance, raising any red flags, telling you about any applications that are nearby that might be useful for you. And that's a way of, getting a bit more of a formal approach from a planning consultant. Now, all of these things might be either too expensive or too timely. So it depends how much time and cost you're willing to put into it. Other thing would be to look, speak to an architect that you work with, try to get their views on, the design aspects of it, how it could be designed to be less intrusive or blend in with the nearby properties, for example. Speak to other developers, so maybe get their views, send it over to some, a developer friend that that has done something like this similarly. Get some insight from them. If you know someone that's worked in that particular borough, that council borough, for example, maybe speaking to them to get an understanding of what that particular council may view in terms of your this specific project. Check other planning applications nearby for any similar sites, similar developments, or even better, if there has been something very similar nearby that's actually been refused, you're going to have a checklist of all the things that you are likely to need to do to actually get yours approved. So what hurdles you'll need to overcome will be in the planning decision notice with the refusal. So use that to your best advantage. Maybe even read local design guidance. So there'll be supplementary sort of planning guidance and design guidance on your local council website. Maybe have a look at their take on how these particular projects should be. So often they'll have maybe some icons or drawings that sort of show us it. I don't know whether this is let's say this is a parade of terraces or on a high street. So this particular one is surrounded by 5-story buildings, and this is just a 3-story building. Okay, well, there's probably something in the design guidance that suggests that infilling between those 5-story high terraces is actually acceptable and appraised positively, and then that's good precedent for you to follow. If you already have it secured and you secured it on the basis of that hope value, maybe you can ask and negotiate with the seller to maybe reduce the purchase price because it still is hope value, and then maybe add an overage to de-risk your purchase. So let's say, look, we based our offer on getting that 3rd floor. We're not convinced we're going to get it. Would you accept the lower purchase price, but with an overage if we do actually get it through planning, so that you can crack on with the 5 units at lower level and then go in for planning with a de-risked purchase price beforehand. But I know that that's a bit of a difficult one. Hopefully that's been relatively useful. If there's anything that you guys think I've missed, I'd love to know down below. I hope Dan kind of has success with this site.
Just a couple of things on this before we go on to the next slide. One, I think next week, Ben, I want to do an example of however many different ways you can structure an overage. I think that might be useful for people. We do it in multitude of ways on how we structure it per unit, per square foot, a percentage of square foot, a percentage of GDV. So I will go into detail about that next week on Friday. And then secondly, there is no black and white clarity at the beginning of buying a site. Most sites that we buy, we do not know what we're going to get. I actually got stung with my very first deal that I did on my own when I put my big boy pants on, and I was trying to convert a house in Reading to 4 flats because it's a row of 30 houses. All 29 have been converted to 4 flats, apart from my one, and my planning was rejected. And it's just an example of you never really know exactly what you're going to get. And there's a huge strength in de-risking it during the acquisition process to make sure that you can get your ducks in a row before you exchange. So for an example, on a permitted development scheme, for the example, the old Maltings, we were very confident that we would get permitted development rights to convert that to flats. We submitted a fairly seamless scheme of 16 units, and we managed to get the planning consent before we exchanged. All about that timing. If we would have exchanged at risk and not got the consent, we'd be in a very difficult position because we'd be back to planning, maybe full planning, to try and overcome that issue. So there's a lot of work to be done on structure, but to some degree, you're never really going to know. So what I would suggest from an acquisitions perspective is you have to make some assumptions, because your competitor will be doing the exact same thing. Get the contract on your desk and then throw money at planning consultants and architects to work with you to de-risk it for you. It's a process that you need to go through.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, even with my experience and the number of projects that I've done over the last 12 years, I'm still never absolutely 100% sure that we're going to get approval for things. I have to use, to the best of my ability, best of my knowledge, an assumption of what I think we may get through, and spend the money. I always say, with certainly with planning and any development stuff, the more money you spend, the lower your risk starts to become, and it's that curve that kind of crosses over. So the more money goes up this way, your risk starts to come down because you're getting more and more clarity on what is possible. But sometimes you have got to spend that money to start de-risking it and getting some certainty. I just wanted to say, Alfie, apologies. I just want to talk about our templates, because we've been saying, people reach out, register your interest to download our templates. We've been very, very busy, and we've just taken on our new office manager, Christina. We're in the process of compiling all of these templates, putting them in a decent format that is, usable for you guys, and trying to make them as best as they can be before kind of sharing them out there as we said we have. So bear with us. We will get there. We just want it to be, as good as they can be before sort of sharing them around.
Good.
Any other things you wanted to touch on?
Long sesh today.
Yeah, apologies.
I can hear the Henley Christmas Carnival calling me.
Very good. Well, we'll let you head off and have a pint. Thanks for watching, everyone. As always, if you've got any comments, drop them below, and we'll see you again next week at 5.
Thanks, everyone.
We started late as well, didn't we, today?
Yeah, it was only 5 minutes late, I think. We're still live.
Oh.
Still live.